Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here with a video for today, and it's a big, exciting, disgusting one because we've got the roster reveal for the Demons of Nurgle, and I am very, very excited to hop into it. I've got a couple of images here that I'm just going to be running in the background. I've got a couple of concept arts of some of the creatures in the roster, so we'll try and find relevant ones as we're talking through it. But try and keep things reasonably short. We won't waste too much time, so let's hop into it. So, of course, the article is covering the situation with Nurgle. Last week, we talked about the Nurgle faction mechanics, as well as the specific mechanics revolving around the Demons of Nurgle with their unholy manifestations and having ascendancy in the Great Game and cultists and all that stuff. But now we're taking a look at all this sexy roster information. So, of course, first up is Kugath Plaguefather. So I am very happy to announce here, and of course you'll see in the article, that they have brought Kugath to life as he should be, which not only is he a gorgeous model, not only does he ride his palanquin, but he is a shooting character. He is a artillery piece. So they note that Kugath Plaguefather is, of course, big on creating diseases. It's kind of his whole opus, what is the word I'm trying to say? Opus, modi operandi? I don't know. I'm tired. Listen, I just got back from Austin from an Age of Sigmar tournament, so forgive me if I'm a little stupid today. But Kugath's entire thing is that he is an inventor of disease, like his father. Where many Great Unclean Ones are kind of more happy just to spread contagion, or they have an obsession with one particular contagion, or they take up a notable aspect of despair, or being like gardeners and such. Kugath is very unique among the Great Unclean Ones because his fascination lies in being a creator of disease and trying to create an ultimate disease that can infect even the gods. So, as you can see, his palanquin is kind of just a big mobile laboratory. He has all the ingredients he needs carried around his palanquin on the front and the behind of it, and he also keeps lots and lots of Nurglings on hand, because Kugath, you see all those little buckets he has around him. What he essentially does is he picks up Nurglings, dunks them in some new vile brew that he creates, and then he chucks them across the battlefield into the enemy lines to do lots of damage. And it is confirmed that in battle, Kugath operates as the campaign's earliest available artillery piece, hurling explosive Nurglings across half the map to detonate the ranks of his enemies, which is just fantastic. They also make note that, of course, he is a expert and master of the lore of Nurgle, which makes sense. And then, one thing that's pretty cool is that he actually apparently specializes in summoning. So he has the ability to bring lots of more demons onto the battlefield, which it seems that Nurgle is going to have that in a couple of ways. It looks like bringing Nurglings to the battlefield is pretty common among a lot of units. But it notes on Kugath's profile that not only can he summon more Nurglings onto the battlefield, but he can summon what is noted as one very smelly boy. So I'm guessing that later in the campaign, Kugath will get the ability to summon another greater demon, so a Great Unclean One, which is pretty crazy and amazing. They do note that, he's probably the least combat heavy of the Great Unclean Ones, but just because he kind of focuses on other elements, being a shooter and a bit more of a powerful caster, he's not as good when it comes to like soloing things, but he is very, very tanky, which he should be. When you have a Great Unclean One running around the battlefield, their goal is to be a just titan of tank, as opposed to a super killy champion like one might expect with Starbrand or Nakari. But he looks fantastic. I love that he has the lore of Nurgle. His design is great. He has everything he needs to have. He is Kugath Plaguefather, and he has been beautifully brought to life. His palanquin, he operates like Thorgrim Grudgebearer, so he just is on his palanquin. It is technically a mount, but you cannot take him off of it. If you're running Kugath, then this is the only form he shows in, just like Thorgrim Grudgebearer with the Throne of Power. However, moving on to Lords, first we have the Herald of Nurgle, which I don't believe I have a picture of, but we can check out some other pictures. The Herald of Nurgle is, of course, the Lord version of your Plague Bearers, which are these, your big, nasty basic troops. The Heralds of Nurgles are probably going to be your more buff-centric and cheaper option lords. They can come with the Lore of Nurgle or the Lore of Death, and they can actually ride on palanquins, which I have an image of right here. So you can see here's an example of a Herald of Nurgle riding a palanquin. So they're carried around by Nurglings, and they look gross and fantastic. So he can ride one of those just like he could in tabletop. However, there's also a version to ride on a Rotfly, which I don't know if I have Rotfly concept art. I don't think I do. Nope, I don't. That's okay. I think I can't remember if this is the Herald or the Unit Champion. I think this is the Herald, but they look disgusting. They look fantastic, and just bleh, so many boils and pustules and horns and all sorts of nasty stuff. So you can, I gotta say, I really love the fact that they've expanded Nurgle's mount options. Originally in tabletop, you could only take them on palanquins, but I am very happy to say that the Herald of Nurgle, as well as the hero version, can ride on a Rotfly. It actually makes them a substantially different choice than just taking a Greater Demon, because if you have an Exalted Great Unclean one, he's bound moving across the ground. But if you take a Herald of Nurgle, you can actually get a Flying Lord, which can make for a pretty interesting army. So they are very strong, very tough, obviously not as powerful as the Exalted Greater Demons, but are still a worthy choice, and I can't wait to see the Legendary Lord version one day, hopefully in the future, when we get Epidemius. But next up, we of course have the Exalted Great Unclean One, which are these big ugly boys that have the kind of shawls on their head, and they've got two eyes. It seems that if you take a regular Great Unclean One, they only have a single eye. They're Cyclopean, and then the Exalteds have multiple eyes, so maybe you get an extra eyeball when you level up. So here we can actually see him in game, and you can see they're based on the new Age of Sigmar design, where they carry their giant skull flail in one hand, and then a big old bell in the other hand, which Nurgle, of course, has a big thing on bells. But they do note that the Exalted Great Unclean Ones are, of course, incredibly powerful individuals, really powerful sorcerers, very tanky, just stupidly, obscenely tanky, hilariously tanky. And come with lots of fun debuffs and nasty abilities. They can come with the Lore of Nurgle or the Lore of Death, just like all Nurgle characters. So looks great. I just great. Next up is, of course, the Cultist, which I have some lovely art of this guy here with some of the most horrendous boils ever. They're very uncomfortable to look at, though I do like when they have their third eye open to give them the Nurgle triple thing. Man, these guys are ugly. So the important thing to note about the Cultist is that Nurgle actually has two types of Cultists, because one is unique. There is a Cultist you generate to spread disease, which you do through your cauldron menu, which we talked about on Friday's video. But there's also a regular Cultist, and the regular play Cultist is just like all the other Cultists. So they can have they are a casting, fighting support character. This article doesn't seem to have as much information as it does for the other Cultists. I think maybe there's just some details that get left out, and maybe when they release the article for all of y'all to read, it hopefully will have maybe a little bit of an update to give some more information. But from what I've seen, I assume they have the Lore of Death or the Lore of Nurgle. It could be maybe they have a unique lore, kind of like Tzeentch did, because Tzeentch got the Lore of Fire on his Cultist. So maybe they also have a unique lore, but if I had to guess, I would suspect that is not the case. But you know, they're mostly there to be a strong support character, and presumably they will also provide summons. It seems like kind of the big thing with cultists in general is that they are agents. They're more specialized as agents to help you spread corruption, but if you use them in battle, they can be powerful spellcasters, and they seem to typically revolve around summoning demons to the battlefield. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case for all of them, but I would suspect that all 4 cultist variants are going to have the ability to summon demons, but we'll have to wait and see. They look great, though, and by great, I mean absolutely horrifying and disgusting. Next up are the Plague-Ridden, which I think are... maybe... no, I'm pretty sure this is the Plague-Ridden. I think I don't have a picture of the Exalted Herald. I think this guy right here is the Plague-Ridden. So the Plague-Riddens are the hero. They're essentially the unit champion for the Plague Bearers, which... for all of the demon rosters, they have upgraded the unit champions to be heroes because they upgraded the heralds to be lords, which I think is a great choice because it just opens up a lot more customization in your list. So these guys, you know, basically just a hero version of the herald. Same lores. You can take Lore of Death, Lore of Nurgle. They can ride on a Nurgling Palanquin or a Rotfly, which is great. And they offer some cool support options, especially because they can have the loci, so you can give them upgrades and abilities and stuff that will buff your nearby demons or maybe debuff the enemies. And of course, they just give you more spellcasting, which is never a bad thing. Beyond that, we are on to Nurgle Infantry. So of course, we've got Nurglings, which we've seen a lot of in the artwork, which is just fantastic. So the big thing about Nurglings is that there are not multiple types. Nurglings are a large swarm, but it seems the way they basically function is they kind of all jumble together to make kind of these almost mechas, where you can see this guy here. A bunch of Nurglings will basically hold on to each other to make themselves into a vague, larger shape, which is kind of a clever way to get around the fact of them being a swarm. So they're not like a new troop type that is going to suddenly open the doors for swarms to be in the game. It's more that the Nurglings are going to use cheats to make themselves appear more like infantry of a kind in order to interact with the game normally. Though I do hope they have some really fun and wild animations. And so we get a little bit of lore about them, but here's the really fun part, is actually in the notable characteristics. So they note that all Nurgle demons, so everything in Nurgle's roster except for the Forsaken and Chaos Spawn, which are the only non-demons in the roster, share a couple of traits. The 2 big ones are that all Nurgle demons have poisoned attacks, and all demons have Cloud of Flies. So Cloud of Flies is actually different than the version that, say, the Zombie Dragon has, because for those unaware, the Zombie Dragon actually has a very similar debuff in Total War Warhammer 1 and 2, though I believe the Zombie Dragon's is that it debuffs nearby enemies, if memory serves. Nurgle's is that it states that the Cloud of Flies is a Aura of Disease that increases the melee defense of the unit if they are in extended melee combat. So what I imagine this is, and this seems to be Nurgle's kind of big unique mechanic, kind of like how Tzeentch has the barrier and Khorne has the get more powerful for the more kills they deal. It seems Nurgle's thing is Cloud of Flies, which seems to be that when your units get engaged in melee combat, they will start to, the flies will start to affect the enemy, start to affect the demons, which will improve their melee defense. And I'm guessing the longer they're in combat, the more intense the buff gets. So if you really, really want to have, so for Nurgle, you want to get stuck in, and you want to be fighting as long as possible, which I imagine is going to synergize very nicely with Nurgle, because it seems like the big thing for Nurgle is regeneration, debuffs, and massive pools of health, which is great, and everything Nurgle should be. Of course, they note that all the demons, of course, cause fear, have physical resistance, are immune to fear and terror, yada yada yada. Though, they do note that Nurglings have Vanguard deployment, which is really fun. I actually really like that. Next up, we got Plague Bearers, which we do have some art of, the disgusting little bastards. So the big thing about Plague Bearers is they're your basic rank and file infantry. They serve the role of being main tanks, and they also hit pretty hard. So the Plague Bearers do not have a lot, they have very little armor, and they don't have much skill, which seems to mean that their melee attack and melee defense is rather low, though of course you will have poison to help debuff your enemy stats, and you'll also have Cloud of Flies, so the longer your Plague Bearers are fighting, the higher their melee defense will get, so it'll get to the point where they do have good melee defense, but they make up for it by having very, very large health pools, and apparently they hit pretty hard, so they have a fairly high weapon skill, so if they're landing those hits, they're going to be dealing some damage. So it seems like with Nurgle, you're definitely going to be wanting to look for ways to lower enemy melee defense or improve your melee attack, so that you can really take full effectiveness of the fact that a lot of your units hit pretty hard. Of course, they do note that the big thing about Nurgle is that a lot of his demons are incredibly slow, Plague Bearers being some of the slowest that are available to Nurgle, which is, pretty incredibly slow. Then there are some notes about their Forsaken, which I don't know. I don't think we have a easy picture of them. But the Forsaken of Nurgle are pretty standard, like a lot of other places. The Forsaken of Nurgle, a lot of them tend to have like just a small little additional buff, but the big thing is that they give you access to a unit that is relatively heavily armored compared to demons, and of course brings a more reliable, like, high melee attack unit, which Forsaken are really, really good for. They're much faster moving, they have more armor, they have frenzy, and they have higher melee attack. So they're significantly less tanky than the rest of the Nurgle demons, but they provide you a really important, extra role to help fulfill your roster and make things function a lot better. I suspect, especially in early campaign, having a couple of units of Forsaken until you can get maybe some Rotflies or Plague Toads on the battlefield is probably going to be a pretty high priority. Next up are the Exalted Plague Bearers of Nurgle. So the Exalted Plague Bearers are just like we've heard with the other Exalteds. They're just bigger, badder Plague Bearers. However, these are super fascinating because they actually have a shooting attack. So Nurgle has something known as Death Heads, which I don't think there's any art showing off the Death Heads yet, but they're kind of like these heads here. So basically, Death Heads are very short range, heavily armor piercing missiles that tend to come with a lot of restrictions in that they're short range, and there's usually not a ton of ammunition of them. So the cool thing about the Exalted Plague Bearers is that they actually have a bit of Death Heads ammunition. So they have kind of like skink javelins, or those kinds of units where it's a melee unit, but it has the ability that when it's engaging with the enemy or being charged, it can unleash a powerful shooting attack to basically just pepper the enemy really hard and then charge into combat to really start messing people up, which I think is a brilliant addition. Because Death Heads are normally associated with the Plague Drones, which are kind of the elite cavalry of the Demons of Nurgle. So the idea of the elite infantry also having Death Heads, I think, is a really, really clever way to make the unit feel significantly more powerful than their regular version. I think that's a absolutely kick-ass addition. After that, of course, we've got Furies, which Furies are pretty standard in all the demon rosters. Furies are very fast-moving. They're kind of like Harpies. But of course, since they're demons, they will be unbreakable. They'll be unbreakable, but they'll not unbreakable. Sorry, they will not rout, but instead will break down. So they're a little more difficult to hit and run with because you have to manually control them. Because if you just leave them in combat, they'll just keep fighting till they die. But they're really, really good for chasing off fleeing enemy units. And in a roster like Nurgle's, which is really hurting for speed more than anything, Furies of Nurgle, I imagine, especially because they're going to have poison and Cloud of Flies, I imagine are actually going to be pretty useful. And of course, they do have Vanguard deployment just like Nurglings do. Then we've got the Beast of Nurgle, which I'm so happy they're using the modern design for all the demons. but especially for the Beasts of Nurgle, I really like the modern beasts. They're disgusting, but you can almost tell that they seem like they're really like lovey-dovey creatures in a horrible way. So the big thing about the Beasts of Nurgle is that they are a unit of very big, nasty, slobbering dog monsters. Here we got one here. I can't tell based on this. I assume they travel as a unit of like a small group of them, just like other monstrous infantry / monstrous cav. It's always weird in like these still shots that are screenshots because it seems like there's like, oh, there's only one in the unit, but then that turns out not to be the case. So I'm assuming there's probably a decent sized unit of them. But the big thing is that they ooze slime, so they have an ability called Slime Trail. So even if they're sitting still, they're still oozing slime in the area around them. And then while they're moving across the battlefield, they will leave a slime trail behind them that lasts for a little bit. And this slime trail actually does something in game. So it basically is kind of almost, you can think of it as a type of terrain that if enemies move over it, it will slow their movement speed. So basically, you can actually strategically use this to like slow enemy cavalry, or just make it kind of just works really nicely. Is that if anyone gets too close to the Beasts of Nurgle, there's a very good chance they're going to get slime trailed, which is going to make it much easier for the beast to stay sticky on them and really punish them and tear them apart for getting too close. Of course, the big thing with them is that they have massive health pool, very little armor, but they regenerate, which is really spooky. So they have regenerating health, which is really nice on a target that relies very heavily on a large health bar, because it means you're going to get a lot of regen out of it as long as you can keep them alive. But of course, like all other demons, they don't have a lot of armor, so you will need to watch out for fire damage, because if anything deals fire damage, it's really going to hurt these guys, because a lot of their defenses are going, that weakness to fire is going to be quite punishing. Then we have the plague toads. So these ugly bastards were actually a pretty pleasant surprise for me personally. I'm really glad to see we're getting the Nurgle demons from Tarmacon just thrown in for fun. They could have very easily left these out, but I'm really glad to see it seems like they're trying really hard to just get all the demons that exist in tabletop into the game right at the onset. So the big thing about the plague toads, there is a mounted and non-mounted version. So the regular plague toads are just the toads themselves, and they're basically your light cavalry for Nurgle. So they, the big thing is that apparently they have very high mass for their size and unit size. So they're really, really good at slamming through infantry and shoving people around and being a general nuisance, in addition to specializing against infantry. And while they're a little cheaper, but they make up for it by being faster, with their, I'm sure they have like kind of a bizarre leap animation, but they're notably quicker than most Nurgle demons, and the kind of function is, you know, half decent war beasts. Beyond that, you of course can have rot flies, which there's an unmounted version, which are just basic war beasts essentially. But the really cool thing about rot flies is that they're all armor piercing. So all rotfly units have significant AP for their damage, and of course they're very fast because they're flying through the air. So Nurgle can actually field pretty considerable airborne cavalry. And of course they do note that the flying toggle works very nicely with rotflies, whether you have them soaring through the air to attack other flyers, or you trigger the ability to land them behind enemy lines or something, and then get a good sexy rear charge in with a heavy armor piercing poisonous unit, which is very, very nasty. And they have lots of good lore bits here, which I'll let y'all read for yourselves. After that, they talk about the Pox Riders, which you could see a Pox Rider right here. Pox Riders are plague toads that have plague bearers riding them into battle. And the big thing for these guys is they're essentially medium tier cavalry. So they're probably not going to trade super well against other like forms of cavalry. If it's mid to high tier, especially if it's heavily armored, probably not what they're going to be good against. But they are very good against blocks of infantry and hitting. They deal solid damage, but are not the best when it comes to armor piercing. So it's really good to focus them on enemies that don't have a lot of armor, or, you know, get in those heavy rear charges to really take advantage of their really significant mass. But, you know, just adds a really strong additional option and has a really nasty charge. Then, of course, we have the Spawn of Nurgle, which I have over here, which look delightfully disgusting. The Spawn of Nurgle, I imagine, are actually one of the best versions of the Spawn. So something I've noticed about the Chaos Spawn is that every single demon faction's Chaos Spawn have a different ability. So they have like a different kind of passive or little fun thing, you know, like with the Tzeentch one, obviously they have the, I believe they have the barrier, but I think they also have flaming attacks, if memory serves. And the Cornate ones, I think, have Frenzy or something. But the Spawn of Nurgle not only have poison, but they regenerate, which regenerating Chaos Spawn is genuinely amazing. Anything that is 100% unbreakable, having regeneration is obscenely good. Like, that is just pure guaranteed value. I actually think these are going to be a pretty popular unit for Nurgle builds, because like that, it's genuinely just fantastic value. So, you know, having just a fairly and they're going to be relatively quick compared to a lot of Nurgle units, so I think they'll be a really popular form of monstrous infantry, to be frank, for Nurgle, because unbreakable regeneration that has like solid weapon strength to really cut through like lower tier troops, because you could just throw them in and their regeneration will likely carry them a fair bit, especially because they have poison on top of it. Then from there, we of course have the plague drones, which are the mounted versions of the rotflies, and they are pretty much your most elite unit. So for regular like rank and file, your plague drones are your big bads for Nurgle. You know, they're kind of the equivalent of the skull crushers for Khorne and the Doom Riders of Tzeentch. But not only are they super heavy armor piercing and have some nasty, very, very solid stat line, poison attacks, the Cloud of Flies buff, they're flying, so they're heavily maneuverable, they're quick. I believe, you know, they're just a really, really powerful unit overall. There's also two versions of them, actually. There's a basic version, which is just a flying melee cav, a flying heavy melee cav, but there's also a ranged version, which are the Death Head variant. So the Death Head variant are the super elite version because they have the Death Heads. So they have a very, very powerful, heavily armor-piercing missile attack to soften up targets, and then they can fly in to finish the job. But it's just like the Death Heads on the Exalted Plague Bearers, where they have very, very low ammunition. So, I mean, I would be shocked if it was like more than 5, but I'm sure we'll find out once the game comes out. So, yeah, Nurgle's certainly got a lot of options. And then, of course, you've got the regular Great Unclean one, which we see in the trailer wielding its sword to bash a bunch of people around. You can see 2 of them over here. So the regular Great Unclean ones focus as your big bad monster for the most part, and are probably going to be popular in a lot of builds. They can come with a lot of really, really powerful buffs as you kind of build them up. They have really big, heavy armor-piercing attacks thanks to those giant swords they're carrying. And of course, they're wizards. So they're just like the Greater Demons of Tzeentch, where as you advance through your tech tree, you actually have the ability to essentially research spells for them. That way, your Great Unclean ones, even though they're not lords or heroes, they are still wizards that will use your Winds of Magic to cast spells. So you can have tons of wizards on the battlefield if you're playing any of the demon factions, with the exception, of course, of Khorne. So just big, absolutely disgusting mammoths of rotten flesh and boils and pus and mucus that are charging into the battlefield to just chop people up and make it a bad day, while also bringing spells from the lore of Nurgle to play and being big, tanky, nasty things. And I'm sure there are ways to give them all sorts of nasty buffs on top of their basic stat lines and abilities. There has to be a way to give them regeneration. I would be shocked if there isn't, through like your general skills and abilities or the tech tree. And then last, but certainly not least, is of course the Soul Grinder, which the Soul Grinder of Nurgle is the most exotic yet. I am very, very pleased that the Soul Grinder variants for the 4 Dark Gods are very, very different from one another. Like, you cannot mistake them for one another. They're not just color-coded. They are completely different designs, and they are hideous. And the Soul Grinder of Nurgle is no exception with his big old disgusting, I think it's a bile cannon, if I remember right. But the big thing with the Nurgle version is that instead of having the ability to throw, the Tzeentch version can conjure and throw these very large anti-large spears. So not only does it have long-range anti-large spear attacks, but it can also kind of use the spears. It summons those spears and uses them in combat animations. The big thing for the Nurgle demon, beyond its big crap claw, is that it has an artillery cannon. So it has an artillery hand that shoots big globs of poisonous gook at the enemy, and can not only blast apart enemy formations, but of course can be very nasty when battling defensive opponents hiding behind walls and such, because you have that lovely arc of fire. So it's just a big old nasty son of a bitch. So I love the variety in the Soul Grinders. You know, the Corn Soul Grinder, if I remember right, he's got the giant crab claw, and then he's also got a giant sword in his other hand. He's a big melee fighter. The Tzeentch one has the hand where he's like holding globs of light that he can conjure spears out of, because, you know, he's all magical. And then this guy's just got this disgusting like plague cannon that vomits poison at people, which is just absolutely fantastic. And that's pretty much the end of the roster. I gotta say, the Nurgle roster is probably my favorite so far. It's got everything I wanted, and then some. It's got literally all the Demons of Nurgle. I was not expecting the Tarmacon demons. That was a very, very pleasant surprise in my opinion. They could have easily left out the Plague Toads and the Pox Riders, so I really appreciate them going that extra mile to get them in there. And Nurgle looks like a ton of fun. I mean, just an absolute blast to play. Man, I'm gonna have a really hard time not playing him first. Like, it's looking really good. So, I have to say, I am really, really pleased with this roster. I think this is the strongest roster so far. You can tell Nurgle has the most demons, so he just didn't need that much mortal support. Like, literally the only Warriors of Chaos quote-unquote stuff he has in his roster is just Chaos Spawn Forsaken. So it's just like the heavily mutated warriors. Because Nurgle doesn't really need any other support. We know Slaanesh is already going to have a bunch of, it looks like, Marauder type stuff to augment his armies. But I'm very pleased with the Nurgle roster. I think of all the demon rosters, to me, it feels the most true Demon of Chaos, but that's, of course, because Nurgle gets to cheat because he just has the most demons. Unfortunately, the other 3 gods did not get cool, sexy Forge World books that got them lots of new units and stuff. But I'm really, really excited to see this in action. I can't wait to see everything, like, moving around, being played with and shown off. And, of course, we have Slaanesh just over the horizon. So, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Like, how are y'all feeling about who you're going to play first? I know it's getting harder and harder and harder as we approach release, which is coming up soon. You know, we've only got 2 factions left to review after Nurgle. Presumably, we have a Enter the World of trailer coming up, and then hopefully we'll get, like, the mechanics for Kugath and some other stuff. But I would love to know what y'all think of the Nurgle roster, first of all. And then second, I would love for y'all to tell me down below who you think you're going to play first, now that we are to our 7th faction. And we've learned a fair bit about them. There's just, man, there's a lot in this game. Or actually, sorry, no, this is not our 7th faction. This is our 9th faction. I keep forgetting the Ogre Kingdoms have already been revealed. So this is our 9th faction. We've got Slaanesh and presumably Be'lakor, but the mystery 11th. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys very soon for more information. So thank you all for watching. Have a great day. Bye.